So now, let's jump into the flesh and bones. So any rich storytelling is going to require multifaceted characters that we can really feel are real. If your characters fall flat, doesn't matter how rich the rest of the story is, it's just not going to feel as three-dimensional. So, for y'all, what makes a character on a page believable as that three-dimensional person? What traits do you like to include? How do you pick those traits?
Well, if you were here for the last panel, I usually start a story with setting and then figure out what sorts of people would come out of that setting. And usually before too terribly long, some obvious personalities start to suggest themselves, both good and bad. And I think for me, the thing that makes characters most believable is that they are nuanced. No one is ever completely good. No one is ever completely bad. Even the worst people have good qualities. You might have to really search, but they're there.
And I'm going to come in after the building from scene or from environment to, I start with character. I tend to, when I start a book, I don't know a ton of the story, but I know some basic facts. I know who my main characters are, and by know who they are, I mean generally a name. Names are very important for me. They're very grounding, especially because beyond the name, I don't know that much more about the character. I kind of know what they did, but I don't really know the whys. And so for me, it takes working through that second draft, and it's really sort of a beautiful process of coming to know someone. And it's something that's unlike anything I've ever experienced except when I write. You have these sort of people who populate your brain, but you don't know them well until you start getting them on paper and you start sort of putting them in situations and you see how they react and you find what I like to think of as emotional truth. So that's what I strive for in creating a character, not a specific formula, not a specific this person does this or this person does that, but who are they and how do they react in particular circumstances and what drives them, what's their sort of emotional center, and that's what I'm always looking for.
Well, I have I wouldn't call it a trick, I think it's part of the process for me. I follow the example of Sketches by Boz. Charles Dickens' job was to go out into the world and observe regular folks doing regular things and then go back and write about them. And he was very skilled at this. If you've read Dickens, you know how well-defined, how well-rounded the characters are. And the lesson for me in that is that observing those around us is great material and nobody's safe. But that's what they get for living around writers, right? And I think that, so the goal for me is to create character descriptions that excite the mind and tickle the imagination. And watching other people is really a great way to do that. And I think that writers, we do that, I think we do it by instinct. We see the world in a different way. We navigate, we live in the world in a different way from regular folks. And of course, I don't think of myself as a regular folk. I'm, totally kind of odd and an outsider. But I embrace that, and I think that that is fuel you can use, and I certainly try to use as a writer. And if it doesn't come as an instinct to look at the world that way, to observe other people that way, then it really is, I think it's a responsibility almost as a writer to start looking at the world in that way. it's such rich information. So that's how I attempt to really create the hearts and minds of other people on the page.
Our protagonists are often, kind of our heroes. They don't have to be a hero. But how do you decide what flaws go into that? Is it easy to give your protagonist flaws to make them that extra person, or have you hesitated doing that because you don't want to make them seem less than the hero?
I actually sort of love writing sort of difficult to like characters. In my novel, Life and Other Love Songs, at the center of that story is a father who disappears. And as I said, when I start writing, I don't tend to know a ton about the character, but what I did know is that I knew his name, I knew he was going to disappear, but I didn't know why. And as I started sort of working through that character, some of the reasons he disappeared were heartbreaking, but his ways of dealing with those things were traumatizing to his family, they were traumatizing to him, and he ended up being not a very likable character. But after a few drafts, I worked through, and my goal with him, and my goal with all characters, but particularly the ones that are not that likable and behave in ways that, would put you off, is to make sure that readers are really grounded and understand what drives this person. They may not like him, but they understand him, and in some ways can empathize with some of the circumstances. So that's really what I go into it with, not a particular formula, but sort of an understanding, and I think you made a really good point about the observation of human nature. Because in the end, that's what we writers, we're working with. Just sort of the threads of humanity and trying to tie that together into a living, breathing being on the page.
I believe that as many problems as you can throw at a protagonist, the more interesting it can get. and my book is a fictionalized memoir, and I actually didn't include everything that I dealt with. It's fiction. It's fiction. But I wanted to focus on some significant, but not every problem that I ever encountered in life. And so I really focused on the fact that Philbert, the protagonist, like me, was born, grew up in Warm Springs, Georgia, was born gay with a significant skeletal malformation of the chest. I hide it very well with clothes, but I dealt with a lot of other things in my childhood, a lot of challenges, but some of that is in here, but I really wanted to focus in for the purpose of the story. I wanted to serve the story well, and it is a fictionalized memoir. I did that for a number of reasons as well, instead of a true memoir. But I think you can't overwhelm a reader and a character with too many problems, so I think it has to be thoughtful. But definitely, there has to be conflict, or else we don't care. We want to see the journey through the conflict. That's what I want to see anyway.
Yeah, I've never had a problem with giving characters flaws. I think that just gives it texture. There's a cliche, that everyone thinks that they're the hero of their own story, and I'm going to be pedantic for a second and say I don't think that's true, but I do think everyone thinks that they're the protagonist of their own story. There are definitely people out there who are comfortable with the idea of that they are doing terrible things. But I think we as a species are just fabulous about justifying everything. So, that sort of milestone of, goalpost of whatever character is out there thinks that they are doing the best that they can in the circumstances that they are in, or is trying to do the best they can in the circumstances that they're in, has never led me wrong, and has often led me to having characters with serious, significant flaws.
So those are our main characters, but we also have a whole cast of the side characters. When you're developing those side characters, how do you go about the process of deciding how rich and how 3D those people get to be versus kind of your main cast?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I missed that we were just talking about the, I mean, you did say we were just talking about the protagonist, and yet, I have a lot of characters in my stories, so this is something I have to grapple with a lot. How much information is too much information? Fortunately, I have some very understanding editors that help me through that. But I do think that this is a situation where you have to be very careful to make sure that you are not pulling too much from your story. Because those secondary characters could be incredibly interesting, and very often they would like a larger share of the story. And so you have to contemplate, do you wish to give it to them? Science fiction writer Anne Leckie is fairly famous for talking about the way to stop a problematic plot or character who is trying to take over is to hunt it down in the text and kill it with fire. Which is fairly drastic. Personally, whenever a secondary character starts to take over, I ask myself why. And sometimes the answer is because they should. You know, our subconscious often knows what's best, and we don't always trust it enough. So, in cases where that isn't the case, though, maybe that character gets cut.
So my approach to the sort of secondary character is I treat them a lot like the primary character with respect to development. I view them as whole people. They have their own backstory. They have their own concerns, and they just show up on the page less. So I guess I've not really faced the problem of character takeover, but that may yet come, and I may have to hunt them down and kill them. But so far I try to, you know, I just really try to treat them like the main character with respect to making a round character who, you know, has that emotional depth. And when they show up on the page, there's purpose, you know, the motivations of that character just as you do the main character. But you just see them less.
I completely agree with that. I think of side characters, I call them cameo appearance characters. And I think of them as, you know, they often appear to propel the plot forward. And that's really why they might appear in one chapter, you know, or maybe, you know, pop up here and there, but not be a main focus. But I always try to give them an emotional backstory because they have a purpose of being there, just like the main character. Otherwise, it's flat, and we don't care, like, okay, you're there to make this happen, but I mean, if you think about it, it goes back to observing people, like, why are they, I might see, they may be a 5-second point in my life. I see someone, you know, with a huge dog on a leash with a telephone, you know, stuck this way, and there's, you know, and you know, just struggling. Like, what is this person's day really like? Is it this much of a challenge all the way through? I'm fascinated by how did that person get here in that situation. So I actually think, this is how I think of side characters, cameo appearance characters. I think of all of the characters as either friends or family members, typically family members. And for me, a main character is like a child. And I don't think you can love anybody more than your own child. But a side character or a cameo appearance character is more like a second cousin. You love them, you know? You enjoy seeing them at a reunion. You don't want them staying over, but they can grow on you. And sometimes those, I think we all have experienced, as life moves through its phases, sometimes those second cousins become pretty special to you, you know. And when that happens, it's like there's like a spark, and the relationship, you know, sort of burns, and there's fuel there, and it becomes more important to you. And so when that spark happens and they catch fire, they can move into main character territory. In fact, I think it's happened for me. It's probably happened for all of us writers. Like, oh my gosh, that person is more than I thought that person was. It can be really surprising and really lovely when that happens.
So, as we're fleshing out these characters, you talk about writing their backstory, and as you're creating all this backstory, you have all these notes and all this structure, and you can't put it all in the story. So how have you dealt with that struggle, that balance of making sure you've got your details in there, but you're not literally giving them like the how to this character?
Ursula K. Le Guin called it seeding. This idea that you, actually, I don't know if it's on the list of books, but Sailing the Craft by Ursula K. Le Guin is fantastic, and I highly recommend it. One of the exercises in that book is to take a list of information that the reader needs to know. You know, they could be plot elements, that can be background elements, that can be world building, that can be that this particular character is afraid of dogs, whatever it is. And practice writing a particular scene in that setting that communicates all of those things without ever just bluntly spelling out any of those facts. It's a great exercise because ultimately that's a gentle way of introducing all the information that you need. You know, so typically in the setting itself, in the activities that they're doing, in what's going on, you can put a lot of information about who the characters are and what is going on.
And I think for me, just because of my process, I do things backward. I come to know my characters on the page. It's super inefficient. And I end up maybe by the second draft having this bloated, horrific thing, this monstrous draft. But it's all there. You know, everything I need to know about the character is there. And then it becomes the question of, okay, where is TMI for the reader? So then it's roughly around at the end of the second draft where I start reading for that, and I start to take information, still that backstory information that I've created in the draft itself, start to pull that out and put it in an actual character sketch. So I end up with really sort of detailed character sketches by the end of the second draft. And that allows me to sort of see all the stuff I know and look at the draft and say, okay, this is all the stuff I know, but what does the reader need to know? And go back and in that third draft, really start to trim it back. So for me, it's sort of draft after draft of reading and rereading and sort of seeing what's too much.
So I think all of us know the difference between plotters and pantsers. I am not a plotter. I could never be a plotter. I'm a pantser. And so I don't even attempt to edit myself as I write. I don't even think about it. I just write. And of course I end up with these monsters too. These, you know, several tens of thousands of words, too much monsters. But I find that that's just my process. Everybody has a different process, and no one can tell you what your process should be. It has to be something that you develop over time. And so for me, just writing. I don't even think about the editing process because it gives me nightmares to think about the editing process for one day. I know that it will come, and the more I write, the more I am creative, the more difficult that process will be. But to do it any other way would just stifle my creative impulse, I think. And so for me, it's about editing after I have the monster, taming the monster. And I'm not a good editor on my own. I need a trusted group of folks who can help me with that. For me, I think that what I've learned to do, because it's difficult to get rid of words, especially something, oh, I love the way that sounds. I like that. I don't want to get rid of that. I have come to trust a small group of people who are better writers than I am, who've been writing for longer than I have. And it works for me. The trick for me, I think, eventually was to say, okay, if I feel really strongly about it, if it just doesn't feel right in my heart, then I know it's not something that I want to change or cut. But otherwise, I kind of kill things. Not by fire, okay? I'm not an arsonist, I can't do that. Maybe a knife here, I don't know. But it's a really important skill to develop, is to let things go. That's how, because you just, I don't think I'm always the right person to make a decision. If it feels wrong in my heart, I know that I'm the right person to make that decision. But otherwise, I try to trust a team of folks who are part of my pack, and I try to be a resource for them as well. It's not just about my writing; it's about their writing too, and their careers, and what their hearts hold as well. That's how I go about it.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add that for all of the people out there that do not feel like they're properly covered by pantsers or plotters, I can, oh God, I turned my volume off, but apparently I didn't turn the alarm off.
No, keep going.
Come on. There we go. I like to call myself a milestoner because I can. No plot of mine has ever withstood contact with the enemy, which is blank paper. I can go ahead and plot to my heart's content, but during the writing process, I always discover other things. And then I have to decide how I want those discoveries to impact my plot, and I have to change my plot to accommodate them. So neither of those descriptions, in my opinion, works for my process. So, milestoner.
Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in for all and say to all of you, you see what different processes we have. Like, I'm not a good plotter up to a point. I reach a certain point in the draft where I actually do go back and do an outline. But I can't really do an outline before I've written. So there are so many different ways to write. There's so many different ways to come to it that any way you do it is exactly right for you. I'm on my third novel now, and I've tried various different types of writing, but it's only now that I actually feel like a novelist, because I feel like I kind of know how I do it. I'm comfortable with it. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me, because I've been where you are, and I've gotten the tips. I've tried the tips. Some of them work for me, some of them don't work for me, and I'm like, okay, what's wrong with me? Why isn't that particular tip working for me? Because it works for X writer. You have to find out what works for you and get comfortable in your own writing shoes, and we're all different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I'm sorry we keep adding on to this, but the real horror story is that your process might not even be the same over all your books.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you only come to your process after a lot of trial and error. Finding your voice, finding your process, finding what works for you can take years, but it doesn't mean that you can't accomplish something in those years. You can absolutely finish works. It's really about refining and evolving, I think. And so, though I am, if I had to stand on one side of the room, I would stand on the pantser side. Like Anissa, I actually did an outline for Red Clay Susie, but I had already written quite a bit of it, because I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I am.
Yep.
Like, and I was overwhelmed. So I thought, okay, I'm going to outline this. And I picked up writing again. I never stick to the outline. Actually, I outlined it twice. But it keeps me within the world that I want to create, the one that I feel and actually know exists in my heart and mind. But it was really guardrails. I think of it that way. Yeah.
I like the idea of saying milestones because I've also never really identified as either a pantser or a plotter. I'm a plantser, which is awkward to say. Milestones is a little easier. So at the end of the day, though, the long and short of it is create all the rich notes and then edit it down as you go, basically, whatever fits best. So we know, of course, with Red Clay Susie, that is a fictionalized memoir, so your character inspirations were kind of built into your life. Can you guys share with us some of the places that you have found the inspiration for each of your characters in your book and how they've developed over time?
I guess I'll start. If you want me to. So mine is a fictionalized memoir, and two of the main characters are Mama, his name is Betty Tom, and Granddaddy. And they are inspired by my mama and my granddaddy. And in fact, so the mama's name is Betty Tom, as I mentioned, and my mother's name is Betty Tom. And I couldn't think of a better name. So it kind of it's a given who that person is. But part of the reason I wrote the book is sort of a love letter to people in my life, not just my mother, but other people, because my family just didn't know what to do with me. I was such an odd child. I was such an outside their idea of what a boy, a Southern, boy is. I just didn't match anything of it. And for my mother in particular, having this, anomaly among all of the kids around as her own, she did an amazing job. I mean, everybody makes mistakes, but given her limited knowledge of, the world around, the world beyond our small community, and having this thing presented to her, I think she did such an amazing, job, and that inspired me to include her story with my story. So that was the inspiration there.
So I just write straight fiction, but as fiction writers, I think we bring our full selves to the work we do. And what I mean by that is it's the people we know, the people we've influenced, the people we've met, the people we sit next to in a diner for, maybe an hour and overhear a conversation, all of it. So for me, that's what inspires characters. In this book, Life and Other Love Songs, what inspired the main character was just a story I heard. My wife grew up in, an affluent suburb, and across the street there was a family, and the dad went missing, went to work and never came back. This is just a regular suburb, nothing weird ever happens. That weird thing happened. So that story sort of stayed with me, and and I didn't know this man, but I've known a lot of men, I've known a lot of dads, I knew my own father, of course, and I created a character from this story who also has a lot of traits of what I've seen from family members and friends. I think, I certainly for me, I bring a little bit of everything to my creation of characters.
So when I say I'm a nerd, and I follow that up with, I used to LARP a lot. Do y'all know what LARPing is? Live action role playing? Yeah. So in the dedication for the first book, I talk about 3 men that really kind of inspired the main character's personality as a, sort of amalgam of all three of them in different qualities, and they're all terribly proud of this now. But that is, I cannot agree enough with the idea that you bring everything you are to your work. And in some cases, it gets to the point of, I mean, all writers have tells. We all have things that will keep coming up, and themes, plot twists, just elements that will repeat with the kind of characters that we create, the kind of plots and worlds we create. And sometimes those are things that you don't want, just because you want to be able to control everything that's in your book. And sometimes you just go with it. You know, my books tend to have complicated family dynamics, because I have had complicated family dynamics. You know, the idea that family members might not tell you everything. The background of that, by the way, is when I was 19 years old, I found out I had a brother and 2 sisters I didn't know existed. Full brother and 2 sisters I didn't know existed. What? Yeah, my mom had run off with me. I was the baby, and she had grabbed me and run because my dad was in the CIA. I tell people this, and they're just like, "What? No, this didn't really happen." I'm like, yeah, and I'm not even. We want to talk about Las Vegas and the mafia. No, never mind. But so she had no faith, for decent reason, that the court system was going to help her. So she dealt with the pain of having to abandon 3 children by not telling me about them. So I grew up thinking I was an only child. So a lot of my protagonists have these revelations about families they didn't know about, and things that they didn't suspect. And people pointed it out to me, and I went, "Oh, I see. Well, I guess that's going to keep happening."
So, we all have our favorites, our darlings. Within the books you have written, who is your darling? Tell us about them. Uh-oh.
This is like, tell me your favorite book question. I love my babies. What are you talking about? Just pick one. Honestly, I couldn't just pick one.
Pick a few.
We'd be here for a while. Let the other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick just one, because writing a novel, at least for me, takes a long time, and you're spending a year or 2 with these people, and even the characters you don't like, they mean something to you. They're real to you. You spent a great deal of time with them. So I can't pick one character. But I will talk about a character who I like quite a bit. One of the characters I like quite a bit in my latest novel, and she is a mother who she's the one who her husband disappears on her. She is someone she's an incredibly gifted singer. She had a life for herself that she expected to live, but those dreams were lost. And so through that character, I explore the question of sort of, what do you do when everything you expected, this life you thought you were going to live, turns out to be shockingly taken away from you, and you also don't have any of the tools to move forward in a way to take care of your family, because you weren't expecting to do it. So what do you do then? And I just love the grit of this character. The fallibility of this character, the sort of reality of, you know, I'm not gonna do it all right, but I'm doing some of it relatively okay. So, yeah, that character.
So I have a lot of favorites too, I have to admit, and I think that it changes, especially, this has been a wonderful year. I've had a chance to go to so many places to talk about Ray Clay Susie and meet so many other authors and writers and readers. And I spend a lot of time alone in rental cars or in the airport, and it gets really lonely. You know, you forget how much your community means to you, how much your home means to you, how much your family members and friends mean to you when you're, like, it could be just like a day or two away, but it's the loneliest, it's such a lonely feeling to be out on the road. Because you finally achieved this like amazing dream of publishing a book. You're like, oh, you've been thinking about it for years, and it's a great gift, it's wonderful. But there are those moments when you're alone and you think, oh, so what? So it gives you a lot of time to think, and sometimes you think about the book, because that's what you're out to talk about. And I find that I seem to tend to focus on one character or another at a time. Like this trip, I'm actually thinking a lot about, Philip has his best friend from first grade all the way through high school is this boy named James, and James is a kindred spirit. He's another outsider. He lives in a world, he's black, and he lives in a world where racism is just a fact. Conscious and unconscious racism is just a fact. It's part of that world. The 1960s and 70s and early 80s in the Deep South. But he is the most resilient, funniest, most insightful character in the entire book. And he sees the world for what it is. They're similar in so many ways, Philbert and James. But James helps Philbert see the world as a much more inclusive world. He helps him see the world for what it is. And so I love James for that. And then there are so many other characters. And I think I love moments as much as people, because I try to give every character, even the characters who are not the most lovable, moments of their own to show their humanity. You said that no one is all good and all bad. And I totally agree with that. People are complex. And that's really the challenge of creating main characters and cameo appearance characters, or side characters, is to make them, depending on the genre, but to make them as real as possible. People want to see themselves reflected in literature. And so those moments where even the ones who are not the most likable have moments of humanity and get a chance to see, oh, that person is really dealing with something real, no matter the bad stuff they do. That kind of fills your heart up, So today it's James.
Do you want to try to take a crack at that?
Oh, no.
Well, I know I basically just asked them to pick their favorite child.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier to pick your favorite other person's child. Do you have a character that is in another book somebody else wrote that has really spoken to you or has stuck with you?
It's just another way of asking what is your favorite book. I mean, there's a lot of characters that I adore for various reasons. I adore Christian Avasarala from The Expanse.
Yes!
She's amazing. I totally agree with the decision to put her on the screen right away when they made the TV series, because the second book was too long a wait. There's of course, I'm blanking on his name now, which is just, sorry, it's, there's a Dorothy Dunnett series from way back. And Lyman, thank you. And the main character in that series is just the most scoundrelly of scoundrels, and he's amazing. And the more I could sit here and think about it, the more I would be able to say. But the most favorite?
Yeah, again, I can't do most favorites, so I'll give you one of the most recent. One of the things I love about books is that they take us to places, you know, that are often unfamiliar to us, that are new. We learn about the ways in which other people live that are different from ours. Reading, you know, it expands the mind and the heart, and I think generally makes us better people. One of the characters, I like historical fiction quite a lot, and one of the most recent characters I love is Marie de France in Lauren Groff's The Matrix. Lauren Groff is just a master of the craft, first of all. But this character, she's based on a real person, and but there's not much known about her. So the author had, you know, quite a blank canvas to do as she would. And we see this character, and it's a pretty thin book. It's, you know, a couple hundred pages. But we see this character from, she's a 12th century nun in France and then England. And we see her from a young woman to death. And she's thrust into life as a nun. This is not what she wanted to do. And she turns this abbey into something incredible. And it's through her own grit, and it's through a lot of personal pain. It's a really sort of simple story, but it's just powerful, and this character is incredibly powerful. And it's something to me to think that this, you know, to know that this woman lived. Not that she lived exactly that way, I don't know, but I'm glad her story is out there and being told.
That is such a, she is a master. It's a masterwork. And actually, so the actual, I'll get to my answer, but the audiobook is, if you pick the audiobook up, it's voiced by the actor who is the aunt of the Duke in the Bridgerton series. Oh my gosh, the voice is just, anyway.
I bet you it's really
Oh my
really
gosh,
good.
it's
I've read
amazing.
it, but
It's amazing. So if you're an audiobook listener, recommendation.
Matrix by Lauren Groff.
Yes.
Mhm. Pretty much anything by Lauren
Yeah,
Groff.
right,
She's
right. I heard her speak
goddess.
like last week at Politics and Prose in DC. Amazing. Scout Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. That other outsider child who looks at the world around her and questions and doesn't understand it. It speaks to me on so many levels. So it has to be Scout Finch, my favorite of all time.
So we've talked about processes, kind of what stands out for in creating those fully fleshed out characters. And I know you had mentioned some tools for people. Do you have any other books or tools that you could recommend folks who are really struggling with adding in those flaws or fully making that rounded character? I know I've heard, for example, Save the Cat, Write the Novel, which I think we may actually have back there on the Brave and Kind table. That's one a lot of people have used. Do you have any other suggestions for folks?
Hilariously, there's a website called I think it's called Sorting Hat, which should let you know where it originally came from. Although I believe they have removed all. It was almost entirely created by people in the queer community. So, needless to say, they have divorced themselves from its origins. But it is a really interesting way of organizing characters by house affiliation, and it's just a shorthand, but shorthands can be very useful. particularly if you're trying to get a quick grasp on how your characters are reacting with each other and how they'll respond to problems. You know, somebody who is, what was it, I think Badger, is what it's become. It's not necessarily as memorable as the originals, but what can you do? And you know, somebody who is in Lion will approach problems from completely different ways. Again, it's just a tool. When I wrote The Ruin of Kings, I did an awful lot of stuff using tarot as a start. Just because, you know, 4 is a really important number through the series, and so, you know, I went with a 4 elements thing through it. So tarot was great for that. Whatever it is that just will help you get that spark, that inspiration or that ability to conceptualize a character's reactions.
I'll be honest, I've not read a ton of craft books, but what I do is I read a lot. And I read writers who you know, boy, I wish I could do that. You know, boy, I wish I could do that. Boy, I wish I could do that. So my biggest piece of advice is to read a lot, and then to also write a lot. Sometimes it can be really, really hard to sit down at the desk and, you know, you have that blank page in front of you and you don't have a ton of ideas. Sometimes it's helpful to just give yourself a prompt, you know, to think about, you know, what one of your favorite writers has done and try to, you know, rewrite something in that style. Just whatever it takes to sort of get the brain moving in that direction. You know, that's what I would advise.
Anissa, I agree. When I feel sort of uninspired or stuck, reading another author's words, I mean, we're not copying them, but it does unlock something about the creative process to know that there's another world out there that I didn't know about. It's just very freeing. So I agree completely. I have 2 books to recommend. One is Bird by Bird by Annie Lamott. It is, Benji knows it. It's so good. It's so good. And the other book, it's On Writing by Stephen King.
Actually, I have read that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really enjoyable. It's almost like a memoir, and I guess it is a memoir. But there were like 3 nuggets that I took away. Like the whole thing, didn't work for me, but I took away a few really key points that were really helpful. So that those are my 2 recommendations.
Just that On Writing was fundamental in me deciding that I don't have to listen to all writing advice. That just because somebody has a book published, that only means that they have written what works for them. And even then, damn it, Stephen, you just finished telling me that you wrote a 40-page summary for Carrie, and then you tell me you're not a plotter. There's a really old, this isn't necessarily so much for characters as it is for just writing in general, and it is an old, dated book. It is racist, sexist, and every other kind of thing you could want. But Dwight Swain's Techniques for the Selling Writer is actually has some really good advice. So just ignore everything he says about who should be writing what, and terrible, terrible racist jokes, and he's been dead for a long time. So it's one of those ones where it's like I recommend it, but at the same time,
With caveats, with lots of asterisks next to it. Well, thank you guys so much for helping me dive into Flesh and Bone and talking about creating characters. Did you have
Sorry, is there time? He also.
Yeah, we have a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the questions were aimed toward the psychology of characters. I was interested in the physicality of characters. Have you ever, while trying to figure out how to write a scene, acted out the scene in your own living room or something of that sort? Or have you approached a character from a trait rather than from a mindset?
So
With
for those,
respect-
sorry,
Oh,
for those paying attention to the live stream, just to repeat it, we're asked about creating a character's physical traits and being able to physically embody that character.
With respect to acting out certain movements and scenes, I've done that not necessarily to embody the character, but mainly to make sure that a thing can be done.
Yep.
So I have done that.
I do that, and I actually read everything that I write. I read out loud, especially dialogue. It's the best way to test your dialogue, because if it sounds right to you, I mean, it may still not sound right to anybody else, but it's one way that I test it. I also ask people to read certain passages. Like, I want to hear it. I want to know what it feels like. So yeah, and like going back to Sketches by Boz, watching people, observing people, that's the best way to capture physicality and what people do naturally.
I apparently am guilty of having whole conversations over the keyboard while I'm writing, and sometimes, yeah, just stalking around the living room. I tend to not do the, I block out fight scenes, you know, because that's the one where that tends to come up the most. Is this, how would this even work? But as far as defining somebody by a trait, you have to be careful about that, because depending on what the trait is, that could end up as something that's really problematic. You know, if the defining trait is a disability, or if the defining trait is some sort of neurodivergence, if you're not very careful, you could end up doing something that is all the wrong kinds of two-dimensional. So just a warning, I guess.
I'm actually disabled, so.
So you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got one quick question. How, when you're developing a character, do you not put too much of yourself into that character as the writer, so you're not stymieing that character's development?
For those tuning in, it was how do you prevent yourself from putting too much of yourself into the character and kind of stymieing them as being more three-dimensional?
Well, since mine is a fictionalized memoir, I guess that's a good question. Again, I don't edit myself when I write initially, and the whole purpose was to put the heart, the essence of my story, my world, on paper. And I did it for a particular reason. I wanted to, you know, I did it as a healing process. I think of it as an exorcism by exposition, initially writing this book. About halfway through writing it, I decided I was really writing it, I was finishing it for young people who are in crisis, at-risk youth. And it wasn't for me anymore, because I'm okay. I'm doing pretty well. I'm grateful that I'm still here. So I didn't edit myself. In fact, I thought infusing it with more of with my heart as I could, would only make it more real and meaningful for people who need another. I thought of it as a roadmap for the heart and mind, not for a car, which I have one with me, a Matchbox car, which features prominently in the book. But I think of it as a roadmap for the heart and mind for people who are struggling as I did when I was young. So I put everything that I could into it in some form.
I don't. When I say I don't, I mean I don't pull back. I do what he's talking about. You're acting with words, right? So if you were acting a role on the stage or in front of the screen, part of your job would be to find a way to relate to your character, to the character that you were acting in such a way that you can portray it believably. And usually that is not by distancing yourself from that character. It's the opposite. It's finding those qualities within that character that you do relate to. That can be tricky if you're writing about somebody who's a horrible person, but maybe deep inside, a lot of us, we do have that darker capacity to be horrible people. So I would caution the opposite. I would counsel that what you may need is more empathy for your characters and not less.
Do you want to add anything in our last minute?
Yeah, I agree with both of them. In my first novel, The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls, there's one character in particular who is very much me. I could not have written that character from any other perspective. She would not have been genuine from any other perspective. So, you know, she just had to be exactly who she was, and a lot of it was me. In my other novels, I find that there's a sprinkling of me. So I'll just sort of go back to sort of what we started with. You know, as a novelist, as a writer, you bring your whole self to the page. And I think we're almost at our best when we kind of see it and we make the absolute most of it.
All right. Thank you guys.